Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on our program today. We have the honor and the pleasure of interviewing Mary. I call her Mary because that's how I met her a long time ago. Mary Langer Thompson. She is a writer, a poet, PhD out of UCLA. Sorry, USC. It was out of UCLA. She lives here in Southern California in the high desert, and I had the pleasure of having her actually on the air. This will be our third time. First time we sort of met on our own. Second time we did a wonderful book, did a lot of readings. When the virus came calling, COVID-19 Strikes America, we want to thank and highlight Thelma T. Reyna from the Golden Foothills Press, who put this together, and many contributors to this outstanding book. And then we met again. And thank you for accepting my invitation to be back on my show. And we want to talk about your background as a writer, but I also want to highlight two of your wonderful books, which I have at hand. How the Blue-Tongue Skink Got His Blue Tongue. That's an interesting title. And we're going to ask you to go over your book and read a couple of readings. Poems in Water, Mary Langer Thompson, Indie Excellence Finalist Book Awards. And what I love about this also is I caught my eye was the water work on the front image done by her mom, June. So that's really wonderful. We're also in this show remembering her husband, late husband, David. So we're dedicating the show to him as well. So we're very, very happy to be here with you. Mary, let's start with you, some of your questions. Let me take you back a little bit in history, your history. When did you pick up the pen and say, I'm going to be a writer?
Well, I was an English teacher, secondary. And so I knew when I was a senior in high school, I had a very encouraging English teacher who, in a sort of slanted way, showed me that I could write. And she thought I had plagiarized a paper that was about the lamb and the tiger. And because I had a very strong religious background, and in those days, in the 60s, we didn't have the internet and we didn't have time to even go to the library for that assignment. So I assured her that no way did I plagiarize it. It was my biblical background that I knew how to interpret those two poems, The Lamb and the Tiger, good and evil, and Adam and Eve, and all of that kind of thing. So she encouraged me. And my mother went to an open house. And because I wasn't that good in PE, we had to go to a dance concert and write a evaluation, and the teacher raved to my mother about my writing. So I started to think I could really write, and I decided that I loved literature too, and that I was going to be an English teacher. And I made that decision when I was a senior in high school, and actually went to summer school so I could get through faster and start teaching, which I did, and that was my career. I was in the classroom for close to 20 years, and then I became an administrator and a principal. So I didn't really start writing poetry, however, although I taught it and I had kids write it, but I didn't really start writing it myself until lines started descending. It's kind of how poetry works. It's more inspirational. If you're going to write an essay, you write, you set your mind to write it, and you do a little research, and you mix fiction and nonfiction together, at least in your introduction, and it's just a very different process. But in about 1999, 2000, lines started descending on me. I would go to work and maybe I'd see petals on the ground and I would think, oh, they're shaped like tears. And then I would just think about those lines and build around them. And I started writing poetry, and then I started submitting, and people seemed to like it. And just have continued ever since. And when I moved to the high desert, I found the California Writers Club, and we started the Poem Smiths. And now there's about 10 poets, and we meet every 2 weeks. We're meeting on Zoom now because of COVID. And we critique each other's work, and most of us have become published, and we've been together now for 3 or 4 years. And so I'm very proud of them, and we influence each other. They got me back into haiku and in having more form, and it's just really a terrific group, both the Poem Smiths, which are a part of the California Writers Club, and the Writers Club themselves, because we edit each other's work. We support each other at events, and it's really a wonderful community. And now we've gotten into the schools with a memoir project where for 3 years we help high schoolers write memoirs, short memoirs, like 3,500 words of their grandparents or somebody over 50, which we call elderly to them. They want to go back to 40s in some cases, and we say, no, 50 is our limit. But they write and we publish their work. So we've done that for 3 years in a row. And one of my ongoing projects, it's almost completed, is that we're going to publish a handbook so that teachers can use it, because it took us a year and we had over 100 people involved in the memoir project, as far as publishing, editing, helping the kids, going in and having small groups. And it was just a wonderful experience, and involved the whole club, which is close to 100 members now. So very proud of the California Writers Club. And I moved to the high desert from Canoga Park when I became a principal in Adelanto, and I had met poets down below and was involved in a couple of the groups down there, but I was going to focus up here, and then I met Thelma and at an event, and she kind of pulled me back into that Pasadena, Glendale area, San Fernando Valley. And
that sounds like Thelma, all right.
Yeah, and I'm really happy about that. So that's kind of where I am now, and I'm retired, so I can write more and lead the Poem Smiths, and
that's outstanding. You remind me a little bit of my story. I've never been a writer. I mean, a poet. I think a poet. However, the strange part about all this is that my aunt, which I used to live with her during the summers when I used to come up from Mexico to live with her for a couple of months every summer, she was always sort of exposing me to the world of writing. And then one day it dawned on me, I said, wait a minute, she's a teacher and she's an English teacher. But what I really didn't know about her, and she was so humble about it, is she never told me that she had been published. I didn't know. It was sort of like we found out almost by accident, but she had done all these poetry submissions, but she never mentioned it. And I always wondered about it, but I'm sure her influence is still with me. And I think that's partly why the appreciation is there. I also taught high school, but I taught economics. So my field was something different. But I remember asking the students, I said, how many of you think you could make money writing poetry? And the kid says, ooh, poetry. Oh my God, poetry. And I said, well, you listen to poetry every day. You're always listening to it. He says, no, we're not. I said, yes, you are. I said, what do you think the rhymes in music is all about? I mean, if you don't hear the music, they're reading poetry to you. I said, just listen to it. And I pulled up a couple of stories and I said, it's all poetry. All of a sudden, the kids wanted to learn poetry now. Even rap is poetry. So,
Yes,
it's more around us.
absolutely.
Yeah. People don't think of
Absolutely.
it that way. It says, yeah, I'm listening to poetry. I'm listening to rap. What motivated you to write this wonderful book, Poems in Water?
Well, it became sort of a collection, and you kind of learn as you go along, and you realize that poems together have even a different power than poems separately. So just after several years, you get a group of poems and you think, well, they kind of go together, or even if they don't, you have a collection. So I started submitting them, and a company in Colorado decided that they liked it and were going to publish it. And it kind of took off from there. And when we moved up to the high desert, we also moved our mothers because they came up and liked the area. And my mother moved to Sun City and joined the art club. She's also a former teacher. And so now at 97, she is still painting a picture a week.
Wow.
And I tried to help her with her Christmas card this year.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So well on Shutterfly, I had shadows and stuff in it, but next year I'll do better. And but she's a very good artist. She sold some of her work, and she's actually influenced me to start to combine some of the art with poetry, because she told me, she got me some colored pencils, and she said, some watercolor pencils, and she said all you have to do is dip them in water and you can play around. And so yeah, art therapy is wonderful, and I like to combine it with words. And so I'm starting a little bit and made some of my own Christmas cards this year. And so we've influenced each other because she's a published writer now too. And she joined the Writers Club with me. And so she's writing, and she was a member of, before COVID, the Wise Women, which you had to be over 90 to be a member of. And there were 4 women, and they were going real strong until COVID hit. And the Writers Club is real proud of them as well. And they featured them in a panel that said it's never too late to start. And that's my mom. It's never too late to start something. And she truly is a lifelong learner. And I love featuring her art with mine.
That's outstanding. I would like to ask you, please, if you would read one of your poems here in this wonderful book, The Poems in Water, by Mary Langer Thompson. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about your other book, the other Dinky. And Dinky, the hero who does what's right. But if you can please do us the honor of reading one of your poems from here.
Of course. Okay, I'm choosing Wishbone in Moonglow.
Oh.
And I'm choosing that because I wrote it. My husband was in the hospital, and I came home to an empty house and saw this wishbone left over on the sink. And through the window, the moon was, a cloud was going past the moon, and the lines just started to come to me, and I wrote it, and I started to submit it, and one person wrote me back and said, I'm not the judge, but I really love that poem, and I don't usually write to people, and I don't know how it's going to do in the contest, but really loved your poem. And that was very moving. And it was this poem that won me the title of Senior Poet Laureate of California. And so I think it's my most published poem. And my husband loved it when I read it to him when he was home. And he also he loved wordplay, and he had a very great sense of humor. And so we would drive in the car, and he was the inspiration for a lot of my short stories and a lot of my poetry lines, and really helped to show you can write a poem about anything. And so we enjoyed collaborating, and I always read him my poems before I took them to my poemsmiths group, and he would comment on them and just change one word or help me with a line. So this poem is really, really special to me. So, Wishbone in Moonglow. I leave you to the doctors and nurses. Come home to our dark kitchen, that dry, brittle wishbone still on the counter, illuminated by a moonbeam. We were going to split it together, but not now. And anyway, it seems silly to pull in opposite directions as though rivals. I step closer. The bone's shape is an open heart. And I know that I want for you what you need for me, that what we hope for each other, until the clouds cover the moon forever, that the light not leave us tonight. Thank you.
Wow, that's extremely touching. I can see why it's used a lot. Wow. Where can our viewers and listeners find your books?
It's available on Amazon, and it's got several reviews. So I would appreciate a review, an honest review, if you do buy it. And I do sell it at events when COVID's not happening. So
soon.
I am also on Facebook under Mary Langer Thompson, and if you private message me, I can always sell you a signed copy.
Excellent. Tell us about your other book. I'm also very honored to have about Skink, got his blue tongue.
Thank you. That was a really, really fun one. And it comes together from many different directions. I was teaching Steinbeck's work. The title just escapes me right now.
The Grapes of Wrath?
The Pearl.
The Pearl.
And I was teaching it to 10th grade gifted kids. And the word Eden came up in the first paragraph or second paragraph. And I'll be darned if those kids did not know the story of Adam and Eve. And I was shocked, of course, and had a fit. And kids don't seem to go to Sunday school or mass, I guess, much anymore. And really was astonished that I had to explain the full story of the garden. And so that always kind of irked me. And one time I had taught the Bible as literature in my high school, which was in Glendale, Hoover High School in Glendale. And that was a wonderful class. And they don't teach that much anymore. There are some Bible as literature courses that have even been approved by the National Council of Teachers of English, and teachers themselves don't seem to understand you can teach about religion without teaching religion. And so anyway, that was a little bit of a factor in writing this book. And then one of my relatives called me one day, and he was in financial straits. And he told me that he had sold a skink to pay for his mortgage. And I said, "What's a skink?" And it is an animal that is native to Australia. And he had sold a blue-tongued one. And so you can own them in America, but they're very expensive. And they live for about 20 years. And they're a very good pet. And so they're a real animal. And my husband and I had traveled to Australia. He put in some of the first computers back in the 80s and installed them on a business trip there, and I got to go along. And I looked all over because my son was about 5 years old for children's books in Australia.
Mm.
And I couldn't find that many. And I brought back one. There's a poem about it, about a dingo dog that scared my son silly. And they just didn't have in those days that many children's books. So, kind of the factor of the skink, I guess, and why in my imagination he went into the garden. Um, and I placed him in the Garden of Eden, but I don't call it that. And used that basic Genesis story to build my story around, kind of came from that influence that kids don't know the story, and the story of loving Australia, and writing about that animal that was native to it, all kind of came together in my imagination. And I wrote it, and my mother loved it, and my husband loved it. And so I just decided that that
All
was
these,
going to be my
so
story.
all these pieces, you put them all, they sort of came together in your mind, and they
Yeah.
forged the outcome of this book, and including, like you say, the story of Genesis. That's very interesting. Wonderful. I would never, in a way, when I sort of looked it over and I saw animal and human speaking to each other, that's the first thing that came to my mind, but I didn't know the background of that until right now. So I will say this. I think snakes get a bad rap on that story, but that's a whole different story on that one. So did you get any reactions from people in Australia on your book?
Yes, actually, it's controversial. Which,
Whoa, let's go through that one.
well, one person told me that they thought I was putting all the blame for the fall of man on a woman. And I found myself defending the traditional story that is what the story says. A traditional publisher wrote me and said, I love that story, but I could never publish it. And I said, why not? And she says, because I don't believe the story. And I thought, well,
it's a story.
I know. Yeah. I thought maybe that was one of my 10th grade students that
trying to get back to me before all over.
So I got some surprising reactions. My son gave it to a friend of his and then came back and said, Mom, he was shocked. It's a Bible story. And I thought, well, at least he recognized that. I'm not trying to indoctrinate anybody. And yeah, just some funny reactions that have surprised me. But then I got some reactions where kids just absolutely loved it, and I got letters back. And then when I published my second one, The Gull Who Thought He Was Dull, they liked it, but they were fans of Dinky. They liked Dinky better. So it's been kind of delightful, and I never know how people are going to react. So on that one too, I could use some honest reviews. And
I went to Catholic school, K-12, and also high school, so I'm familiar with the stories, and I can't imagine having the exposure without seeing religion. And I'm not talking Catholicism. I mean, I've been to Israel and I've been to South America, and you see it. I mean, it's all around us. I mean, how can you not see it? And everybody has their interpretations of it. Going to Egypt, they have their own interpretation of the Bible, if you will, and their own other realms of looking at the world. So Christmas, oh my gosh, how can one not see the whole parameters of the Catholicism and other religions as well, in the influence of that as well? And obviously politics, when we hear Armenia and Turkey, and they're still alive. The cultures are still around. It's not
Right,
easy. So
exactly.
I applaud what you're saying, that the idea of incorporating these worldwide stories. And I like the way you did it. It's very, very
Thank you.
thoughtful of you as well. What what advice do you have for future poets?
Future poets. Well, we don't make much money. In fact, if you're going to submit work, often you have to pay money. So set a budget and maybe not go above, like to enter a contest. The judges should be paid because it's a hard process, but maybe not go above $25 or something like that. Also, I really broadened my sense of what poetry is. When people come to Poem Smiths, they often have that uh, the hallmarky type of attitude. So there's a lot of general words like soul, and they sound like Hallmark cards. And I think the Poemsmiths have progressed so that we've read enough other poetry and philosophies that we really believe in the concreteness. Poetry lies in things and in unusual connections, not in the old traditional connections. And so if something is too common, then um, maybe we want to change it and make it more original and give it some more thought and craft. Craft is important. And so when we have somebody join and they can't take criticism, they usually drop out, but then they'll come back usually. Maybe they think about it. And we try to be really kind in our criticism. We try to point out the strengths in the poem before we say, you might want to do this or that. And they're just suggestions. So to future poets, I would say join a group. We need each other. The Poemsmiths have made my poetry grow. When I started it, I didn't think, I used to teach haiku in junior high and high school, but then I read criticism that the Japanese kind of laugh at ours because their meter is different and we don't always stick to nature, but that's the American way. We make everything individual. And so they've gotten me back into haiku, my Poemsmiths have, and we even performed our poetry. So it made me think about reading differently and with more expression. And let's see what else. They have had an influence on me as much as I've had an influence on them, I believe. And so I don't like elitism, which a lot of English teachers would stick to. And I would never teach poetry the way I used to teach it, where you analyze what each line means, because I've had some of my poetry analyzed in that way. And it's like, oh, I never thought that at all. And so anyway, we try to not have our poem be too obscure, but also have a little mystery in it. And just my advice would be join a group, and it will strengthen your poetry and show you that anyone can write a poem, and get your rough draft down and then let them help you craft it and make it as good as it can be.
We're getting, and unfortunately, to the end of the show, but you raised the question for me. If you could help me answer it and again share it with our listeners and viewers. Let's say I move to a new city. I don't know. I'll say Palm Springs. Just happen to move there. How do I find fellow poets in a new area?
Well, in Palm Springs, there's the University of Riverside Extension, and they have a good poetry group. And so sometimes a college will help connect you. we've tried to reach out to Victorville College, and somehow the connection hasn't really gelled. But find out where the California Writers Club branches are. We've connected with other ones, with the Ontario one, the Inland Empire group, and they're all up and down California. There's 20 some branches, and we have a literary magazine now that takes from all the branches, and that's short stories, poetry, everything. And just Google on the net and find out where these groups are, because I think poetry is making a comeback. And I think the Beat generation for opening poetry up to rap and rhyming poetry again, and free verse, and it's so open that if you're not elitist, you can be a poet, and you'll find a group. They're all over, and it's like students would not admit at first that they were poets, and both girls and boys would have their secret journals, once they found out that they were free to share their poetry. Most people do write and try it sometime in their life.
Also, you made me remember that hopefully very soon we'll be able to go to the library and talk to the librarians. They seem to pretty much have their finger on who's doing what in the neighborhood. So that's another way that we could sort of find out. In our last closing statements, Mary, thank you for being a guest. Closing statements. Let me leave it open-ended. You're a writer and a poet. So what are your closing words?
My closing words are that writing and art enrich our lives so much. We really need them. We need the arts. We need the humanities. And they help with self-expression. They help with getting us through tough times. They help us express our joy when good things happen to us. And we need the arts, and my bias is poetry especially.
Thank you for being on the show. We've been talking to Mary Langer Thompson, and wonderful 2 books as well, and Blue Tongue's Skink, and the other one, Poems in Water. And thank you for reading from your book and all the other ones. And just a quick point, we were talking before the show about another poem in here, Manzanar, the location where the Japanese were held in internment here in California, mid-California, during the World War II period. And I invite you not only to go and visit as well, but also to share your points as well. You're inspiring people to be writers and be poets. And Mary, I thank you for that. That's something that I think you're right. I totally agree with you that our soul is evolved in trying to stay safe and balanced. And I find that poetry is something that is worldwide in any language. So it must bring that same ability to make us all calmer and make us all think more about our existence and appreciate our life. Mary, thank you for being a guest on our show.
Thank you. It's been an honor. And good to see you again, Armando.
Same here. And I look forward to having you in future shows and have you read more of your wonderful poetry. Keep writing.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Same here.